Welcome, everyone. We're really happy to present this at this time with this COVID-19 crisis facing us all. My name is Dave Dubois. I'm a master trainer with Blue Courage, and I'm joined today by Daniel Schmer, also a master trainer. But in addition to that, Dan was part of the development team that worked with Michael Neela when Blue Courage was founded. So our goal today is to pass along information to aid in sound decision-making during this crisis. But more importantly, we really want to pass along some information that can help us make decisions that we can live with after we make them, and also withstand the challenges that we typically receive after making decisions. The information we're going to pass along comes from the book titled Practical Wisdom, The Right Way to Do the Right Thing. It was written by Barry Schwartz and Kenneth Sharp, and it's a great read for anybody who routinely makes decisions that impact other people. The current situation that we're facing is really forcing us to adapt and adjust. And within that adaptation and adjusting, we find that there's increased potential for discretionary decision-making made at all levels of an organization. These decisions are always subject to intense review from various stakeholders. So today we want to help consider what guidance have we used to make decisions, and more importantly, in many ways, what guidance have we given to our staff to use in making discretionary decisions. We're going to review concepts that will increase the probability of a review going well for the decision maker, and also aid us in holding ourselves and those that we entrust to make decisions accountable for the decisions they make. So with that introduction, if Dan's ready to go, we'll have him get us started on the concepts.
Thanks, David. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. You know, when we make decisions, one of the key pieces is we have to remember that those decisions affect human beings, that they affect people. And so the desire to make the right decisions hopefully is of critical importance to us. And when David says, you know, that this affects organizations, whether that is, you know, a policing organization, which a lot of our Blue Courage friends, that's where they find themselves. And that's definitely challenging today, but also, you know, decision makings within our own families, that organization in this challenging time, you know, because maybe the kids are at home more now, or we're, you know, doing physical distancing, and those decisions are very, very challenging. And so in the book Practical Wisdom, Kenneth Sharp and Barry Schwartz talk about, they define practical wisdom as the right way to do the right thing. And they go on to say it's how we come to understand the right way to do the right thing in a particular circumstance, particular person, and at a particular time. And so we think about those three things: circumstance, person, and time. Well, there's absolutely no doubt that today is a particular circumstance. Where we find ourselves today is like something most of us have never faced here at home before. And so this is a particular time, and it's a challenging one. And those decisions we make are going to be felt for possibly a very long time. And particular people, you know, we have to remember that the people in our organizations, they're going through stuff too, and keep them in our mind. And at a particular time, you know, my son's in policing now, you know, and he's working the overnight shift. And that's, you know, that's a very particular time with very particular things going on. And so it's that creates a different dynamic at times. So we want to keep those three things in mind: circumstance, person, and time. You know, and it says the right way to do the right thing. I think that word right is critically important to grab a hold of also, because notice it doesn't say correct. And are doing the right thing and the correct thing, are those things ever at odds with one another? Well, we know, of course, that they are. And so it's important to realize that we're trying to do the right things. And sometimes the right things mean, you know, that always, you know, what's in the policy or the rules that we have at home, maybe we have to adjust those a little bit right now. Aristotle is really the first one that wrote about this idea of practical wisdom, back, I don't know what, 400 or 500 BC. And, he talked about, right thing, right time, right person, right reason. Those are moral skills that we have to develop. And these moral skills today in this challenging time are critically important. But those moral skills, if we don't ever put them in the moral will to act, just wind up not happening. And if we want to look at what's happening in with the Navy right now over the last few weeks, how the firing of the captain, and then wind up the kind of the forced resignation of the acting Secretary of the Navy. We have to wonder if practical wisdom was employed there, and that moral skill, but even more so there, the moral will. Because moral will is about the courageous action. Do we have the courage to act for what's right? The theologian C.S. Lewis, he said it this way. He said, courage isn't simply one of the virtues, but it's the form of every virtue at the point of testing. And so, yeah, the moral skill, identifying the right thing, a lot of times that's not as challenging as it sounds, but we know what it is. But do we have the courage to act for it? And then it's also that moral will to be resilient. Our capacity is being challenged constantly. And so are we doing the things to be in a coherent state so that we can build our resilience, so that our capacity, our batteries are not empty, and we snap and possibly make the wrong decision. And so are we doing those things? And if that's something that interests you, you can go to our Facebook page. We've done some talking on and brought some teaching the last few weeks on this idea of resilience and what it looks like. We'll be talking some more about that in one of these webinars coming up also. And so, how do we begin to develop this, and what does it really look like? Well, the authors of the book tell us there's three important pieces here. And that is our experience, our ability to be empathetic, and our intellect. And so, a lot of times we haven't been through something like this before. And so our experience in this particular realm may not be as grounded as we want it to be. But, in policing especially, we've been through challenging times and done challenging things before. And so we have to go back to some of those things, and to remember to be empathetic, because again, we're dealing with people here, and we're dealing with people that are in their own challenge. And even when they may snap, doesn't mean that we have to. And then we have to rely on our intelligence and our emotions. But both of those, the IQ and the EQ, both play such an important piece in that. And so again, now where this really comes into challenge, because the right thing versus the wrong thing, pretty easy decision. But the right thing versus other right things, that's where this becomes the challenge. And we have to think about what's expected. Well, a lot of times that's a cultural issue. Whether it's in policing or in medicine, or with our teachers today, what's actually expected, and then what's required at the same time. And again, policies and procedures may tell us that to find it, but when it's two right things that's going up against each other, how do we know what that is? And that's where experience, empathy, and intellect play such a key component there. And if we want to think about the virtues that we need to be practically wise, Aristotle said it best: the best way to be virtuous is to practice the virtues. So the best way to build our practical wisdom is to practice these practical wisdom virtues. Things like, number one, courage. Look for those opportunities to be courageous. Not to just say what people want to hear or do what people think, but actually to be courageous, to do the right thing. Look for those opportunities to build our integrity, to act with character, to be fair. David and I had the opportunity to listen to a webinar yesterday. I think it was yesterday, wasn't it, David? Or day before? Day before we did that. with Major Chip Huth of the Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. Chip told a story that I think illustrates these ideas of some of these virtues specifically. In Kansas City, they had put out an order that they were suspending all traffic, or excuse me, not traffic, but parking violations. They weren't going to be writing parking tickets unless there was a real hazard. And so a couple of citizens that happened to work in the healthcare part of it, one of them was a nurse, called the city and said, hey, look, now, we heard this, but can we park here in this no parking zone so that it's easier for us to get to work? And that's, and the city said, absolutely perfect, not a problem. Well, of course, they come out the next morning and their car had been towed away and they have no way to get to work. Now normal business, too bad, sorry, that's just the cost of parking in the wrong spot. But Chip, taking the practical wisdom approach to this, says, you know what? I probably didn't communicate clearly enough to the city about what we were going to be doing. And so he sends a car to pick those two people up, get them down to the tow lot, gets their cars out for free, voids out the tickets, and gets them back so they can get to work. And normal business, that doesn't happen. But that's making practically wise decision. And I promise you, there's nothing in the playbook where the major says, I screwed up. That's my fault. I didn't communicate clearly. And, he takes the heat for this one. And last thing I'll close with here, Dave, is, there's a quote from Maya Angelou about courage. And she said, without courage, we cannot practice any other virtue with consistency. We cannot be kind, true, merciful, generous, or honest. And we can't be practically wise. We can't make decisions without the courage to act for what's right. Dave, all you.
Thanks, Dan. If you look at the concepts Dan just talked to us about, I think we can realize that this topic has always been important for no law enforcement, but for many professions, right? But we're just simply looking at it now at a time when it's all been heightened and we're exposed to a higher levels of challenge. And that exposure to the higher level of challenge, as Dan talked about, is starting to wear on most people's capacity to make critical decisions. In other words, we're becoming weakened in our ability to do this at a time when it's most important. If you think about the things that we're facing right now in law enforcement, just a few, right? We've got unique safety considerations for our staff and how we're interacting with the public we serve, the criminal element we involved with. Those things are things we really haven't had to consider in the past. We're talking about in our profession, the profession has been criticized throughout the country for its ability to enforce new executive orders coming from governors or different political entities that we work with. So we're sending officers out to make these discretionary decisions on very complex executive orders, which are restricting the American public from its freedom of movement. It doesn't get more complicated for the average law enforcement officer than that. What system have we given our staff to make those complex decisions that they're going to be evaluated on, sometimes by the national media? We got HR decisions that we're having to make related to special leave requests and release of protective medical information of our staff for safety reasons. These are all complex and new to us, and they're just a few of the things we're facing right now. So having a system, just a brief system with 3 words like Dan talked about, really creates a pattern interrupt for us in our day. That creates a time for mindfulness. And that pattern interrupt and the mindfulness it creates is actually aiding in building our capacity to be resilient at a time when we need it most. Think about the experience piece that Dan talked about. I had an exposure of a deputy that works for me with a confirmed COVID-19 diagnosis. Well, I've never experienced that before. I've never experienced media inquiries that come with that and how that's going to impact my ability to deal with things. So when we lack experience, it creates a great opportunity for us to reach out and consult. And what I did is I consulted with other sheriffs in different parts of the country who had experienced it. What they warned me on is be ready to talk about how that exposure may have entered into your correctional facility, because that's going to be a very important piece that the media is going to want to know about. Sure enough, when I got calls, what do you think they asked about? They asked about a lot of things, but they certainly asked about, did I introduce through my deputy this problem into my House of Corrections and the correctional system in the state of New Hampshire? Well, that required me to look at the intellect piece that Dan talked about. What's my background in understanding how a disease like this is transferred, and the ever-changing timelines on how it's transferred? That's a piece of intellect that I had to do a lot of research on, and again, look into before I felt even basically competent to be able to understand it. So experience that I lacked, I was able to consult. Intellect that I lacked, I was able to research. That brings us to the piece on empathy. Specifically for this time and this situation, you know, the pieces of empathy that were helpful to me in that one little decision was understanding how it was going to impact the deputy that contracted, the staff that want to have questions about working in the facility, how it may impact the inmate population that I deal with, the correctional superintendent that I deal with, other elected officials I work with in my capacity. So this review of empathy across a diverse group of people that we work with forces us to remember that people are more than just objects. And it forces us to look at the situation from various viewpoints. Again, very healthy from a resilience standpoint at a time like this. The system that Dan talked about really aids in our ability to make a choice on how we're going to respond to something, as opposed to simply reacting from a gut reaction. It also aids in the potential for a confirmation bias, because it forces us to look at this situation from a diverse perspective. All healthy things in making a decision. So I'll close this webinar with just a reminder that this process really does do more than just help us make sound decisions that we can live with. It's also a starting point and aids in building resilience at a time when that's so important. And as Dan said, Encourage does plan to do some more work in a webinar format on the concept and topic of resilience. So with all of that being said, I'll pass back to Rebecca and Jocelyn if there are any questions that have come in that we could field.
We want to thank Dave and Dan for their time sharing this valuable information with us, and thank you all for joining us as well. We're committed to continuing the learning experience for everyone. So if you have any questions later on that you may pop into your mind, please feel free to contact us, post it on Facebook, or send us an email at info@bluecourage.com, and we'll be happy to answer them later. So thank you all, and thank you to Dan and Dave for your information and your guidance.
Thanks, everybody. See you soon.